morning. Welcome to Africa, Ghana. Hi. I actually waited, I think, over a year since I heard the first time about the fact that Farida is going to organize the conference here. I think I was one of the first to fill out the form on the website and say I'm coming. And I want to invite my panelists now. Please come up to the stage. Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation. Magatte from the Senegal and the US. And then we have Miles Suter from Cash App. Great, so our panel is called Bitcoin is Money, and it will be interesting to hear what our activists, experts, Bitcoin users and builders are saying now, this morning. So first, please introduce yourself to our audience. Alex, do you want to start?
Sure. So great to see all of you here. I'm so incredibly excited. The Human Rights Foundation is very proud and honored to be supporting this event. We are here because there is, as Farida said, a connection between money and human rights. I work as the Chief Strategy Officer for the Human Rights Foundation, which is an organization that does civil liberties work, focusing on helping people who live under authoritarian regimes worldwide. And just over the last decade, we started to see how people were getting repressed through money and through the banking system, and their bank accounts are being frozen and they were being targeted. And we started to see how activists were using and turning to Bitcoin as an alternative. So we started to invest more and more time in this space, and we're delighted to do a lot of education and to try and help as many NGOs, journalists, and activists as possible learn how to use this tool.
Yeah. My name is Magatte, and I'm from Senegal. So I wear two hats, one as an entrepreneur, and anyone who is an entrepreneur doing business in Africa, like I am, and like many of us in this room do, would understand from that standpoint how important it is for us to be able to move money in and out of our nations as quickly as possible and as freely as possible. So as such, you can only imagine why Bitcoin matters so much to me. And I like to say Bitcoin, not crypto. That's a whole other conversation. I'm sure you guys know where I'm coming from. But yeah, so that's number one. And number two, I also show up as the director for the Africa Center for Prosperity of the Atlas Network, the largest organization of free market think tanks in the world. And as the director for the Africa Center, I oversee all the free market think tanks we invest in on the continent. And of course, part of our role is to advocate for freedom when around the issue of money. So I'm sure we'll talk about all of that some more.
Hello, my name is Miles Suter, and I lead all things Bitcoin at Cash App. Cash App is an American app that lets you send, spend, save, and invest your money, and we have around 50 million monthly active users. In 2017, we were the first public company to support Bitcoin. And in 2022, we became the first public company to support the Lightning Network. And I just want to open with that I am so grateful to be here. I'm so happy that Farida has put in all the hard work to make this conference happen, because over the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to interact with so many amazing entrepreneurs from the continent, whether it's Timmy, Atsu, Bernard, Chris, Ray. I've learned so much from all of you over the years, especially regarding the hustle and the dedication to making this work, because it's so important for the world. I feel especially lucky to be back in Ghana, because it was 13 years ago that I first was here at the Cape Coast as a young, eager economics student at an Ivy League school. And I realized that there's something wrong with this system, that we can do so much better, that we still have the memories and inequities built into this system. And that's where I first started to break from the sort of mainstream training that I grew up in. And it happened to be the same year as the Genesis block. And having a lot of emotions being back here, but it feels so important, and I'm so grateful for having me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. So let's start talking about the topic of the panel. So in the description of the panel, we also have this definition, this traditional definition of what money is, what's a currency. And it says that money has three main functions. It's a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. And the Bitcoin naysayers, they always say, Bitcoin is not money because it doesn't fulfill any of these properties. So, Alex, I want to start with you. How can we, because I guess we all here will say Bitcoin is money, how can we say that? I mean, if the naysayers tell us it's not true?
Well, it's really funny because I guess the naysayers have never read a history book. Money does not just magically appear in its final mature form. All money evolves over time. Even gold, which was considered the highest form of money for millennia, when it was first initially encountered by humans, it's not like all the humans in the world immediately decided it was money. It took a very long time for people to recognize it was money. It took a long time for people to recognize the qualities that made it a good money. And after many centuries and even millennia, it became known as the best money. Now, obviously, in modern times, money evolves much faster from zero to being money. But even still, it takes time. A really good example of this in the more modern era would be the credit card. When the credit card first came out, people were extremely skeptical. They didn't want to use the credit card as money. When I'm talking about money, what I really mean is like the way that you pay for something at a store or with a merchant. It took a very long time for people to be comfortable with credit cards. And I think it's going to take a long time for people to be comfortable with Bitcoin. It's evolving as a money, obviously, as we know. It has been a fabulous store of value since it was created, since it was launched. But obviously, it's on an evolution where there's going to be a lot of volatility along the way. So that provides its critics with a lot of opportunity to take, shots at it and say, well, it's not very good at that. And then, of course, with regard to a medium of exchange, it's growing and growing. And as you've heard here, people are starting to use it as such. But again, it's like a small fraction of what it might one day be. So look, this thing is growing. It's gaining the features of money as it goes along. If you were to do a thought experiment of, well, what if a new money emerged, what would happen? Well, again, it wouldn't go from zero to full money that we all acknowledge as money in one day. It takes a long time. And actually, if you think about the way Bitcoin has evolved, in my opinion, it's right along course. Like it's doing what you'd expect a money to do as it monetizes. We even have a verb for this, monetize, which reminds us that this is an action that takes time, right? So I think that a lot of the naysayers aren't actually being honest critics. They're not trying to assess Bitcoin from like a neutral perspective. They don't like Bitcoin because it breaks their conception of what money is. It's a very new kind of money and has special features, and I know we'll get into that.
Yeah, and I guess most of them are also very privileged in their views and where they live and what their circumstances are, because we know that traditional currencies have failed us, and especially people in African countries, very often and most of the times. Still, Zimbabwe is the country with the worst performing currency, and Ghana is actually sadly on place 4 of that chart. So, Magatte, can you please tell us from your perspective as an entrepreneur, as an African entrepreneur, tell us how money, traditional currencies are broken and how difficult it is for you to build a business?
Sure. So maybe the best way for you guys to think about money in this situation is, as an entrepreneur, I'm always interacting with my employees, I gotta pay them. I'm interacting with my suppliers, I gotta pay them. I'm always interacting with, so you're getting the gist here. There is always this thing that's being exchanged between me as an entrepreneur and all the stakeholders that I have to work with on a regular basis. What is that thing? It's what we call money. And just to take you back to how things started for all of us, at some point way back in the days, early of us humans, what would happen is Alex would show up and he has 10 loaves of bread, and I happened maybe to have 10 eggs. And if that day I was lucky that Alex needed my eggs and I wanted some of his bread, then we can trade, we can barter. right? But what happens if I'm showing up and I'm telling Alex, I don't want any of your bread. I don't want bread today. Today, I want chocolate, right? Do you think we can trade? No. So eventually what happened is we had to come up with something that made more sense, something that was almost, had no denomination almost, so that you can exchange it for pretty much anything that you wanted, and it had the value that eventually, was put on it, right? So that's the best way to think of money. And then from there, of course, then we decide, what is this thing that we're going to use? In some of our African societies, we went for the cowries. I'm sure you guys remember the cowries. Well, the cowries used to be some of the early money that we had. But what happened to the cowries? All of a sudden, and the beads, also some special beads. Well, what happened, at first it was working well as long as it was something that was hard to come by. Hard to come by. Remember that notion. Not something that everybody just could find under their mattress or in the trees. It's really hard to come by, which means it has this value. It has a store of value. And so, but the problem at that point happened that, people coming from somewhere else, they came from a place where they had more of those accessible, and they're like, wait, over there they value this. Let us take I'm simplifying here, as you can imagine. Let us take, like a big luggage full of this stuff, and we're going to go and trade over there. And eventually, all of a sudden, we're realizing, this cowrie we're using or these beads we're using no longer have the same value, because it seems like some people can just, have tons of it from somewhere else. So this brings us to the concept of sound money. Right? So it needs to be sound. It needs to be so money is that it's this medium of exchange, but rather neutral. But it also have to have sound. It needs to be sound, meaning no one can tamper with it. You cannot one day wake up and say, I decide that it's going to be all of a sudden worth a different amount than it was worth, and it's going to be what it is. Or we see governments doing with every single day they're printing money. That's pretty much what they're doing. So as an entrepreneur, I simply cannot afford money that's not sound, in the sense that I never know what its value is going to be. It's too volatile. I simply can't operate that way. Okay, so from our standpoint, that's how we view money. And of course, one of the things that for me as an entrepreneur in Africa, the reason why I go for Bitcoin is I need all of those elements, but the one thing I love the most about Bitcoin is it happens to be digital. So for me, I just see it as almost like all the values that gold has, but it's on bits. So for all of those, I guess you asked me for some examples. Imagine what would happen to my life today if I did not have to deal with what we call money right now. My employees and I would be, I would be able to pay them more directly. Right now, if you are doing business in Africa, I'm a manufacturer, which means, I'm just trying to see how I can explain this to you, because it's so long. If you want to be a formal business, which we are, it means that every single transaction of money has to be traced. So ideally, my employees need to have a bank account, but I don't want to subject them to having a bank account because of the crazy bank fees associated with having a bank account. So that's number one. Another thing is, doing business in Senegal, every time I need to pay somebody outside of our zone, but Farida talked about, if it's above 500,000 CFA, which is roughly $1,000, I have to ask for permission to have that money taken out. That's insane. One of my suppliers had the equivalency of the FBI show up at their place because they sent money outside of Senegal 3 times in a row, and they wanted to interrogate him as to what is going on here, and so on and so forth. So you're starting to realize all the roadblocks that are put on my way, in addition to simply just being an entrepreneur. This makes no sense.
Thank you, Magatte. So now there's also a difference between traditional currencies and Bitcoin in that sense that we say like traditional currencies are issued by governments. We don't know like how is it backed. So we could say we have closed money versus open money. Miles, do you want to explore that a little bit?
Yeah, I always think it's very funny when academics quibble over the classical definition of money and how it relates to Bitcoin, because in my day-to-day job, I see Bitcoin being used all the time by millions of people. And for many years, I've been obsessed with observing and accelerating Bitcoin adoption around the world. And so whether that's in a pawn shop in Manila, in the cuevas of Buenos Aires, or at the protests in Hong Kong in 2019, I've seen and felt people living and breathing Bitcoin as money, and it's serving their daily needs. And so I don't care what the academic definition is. Bitcoin is money, and it's serving those jobs in a very accretive manner. When it comes to open money versus closed money, I think that's a very, very important distinction. I consider Bitcoin the people's money because of these three attributes. Bitcoin is open. You don't need an existing bank account. You don't need an ID card. You don't need the KYC to use Bitcoin. It's open to everyone. Bitcoin is decentralized. You don't get special privileges because you're rich or because of political favors or anything of that sort. And Bitcoin is permissionless, meaning nobody can deny you from this protocol, no matter whether you have naughty political opinions or you're born on the wrong continent. And so Bitcoin is open to everyone, and that is a totally new phenomenon. And so maybe it doesn't fit the classical definition of money to date, but I guarantee in due time it will capture all three of those plus more.
Thank you, Miles. So now we heard that Bitcoin is decentralized, permissionless, and also private in a way. And the concept of freedom money, it's people's money, applies too. And Alex, you've been working a lot with the Human Rights Foundation on the use cases of Bitcoin as a human rights tool. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And also maybe you have some examples of how Bitcoin has helped human rights activists.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many interesting qualities of Bitcoin that they won't be able to fit into our conversation. We haven't even touched how Bitcoin turns energy into money. I mean, there's so many interesting parts about Bitcoin, but to focus us a little bit on what our panelists have said, for me, there's three areas that really come together to make it a good human rights tool. The first one, again, is that it's sound money. It's not fiat money, meaning, you know, a centralized issuer cannot just decide to print more of it. And I think we've just sort of barely scratched the surface of what that really means. And over the coming decades, that's going to be a lot more clear why that's so important. Because anything that can be manipulated will be manipulated. Anything that can be corrupted will be corrupted. So that's going to happen to every other digital asset in the world. Every other national fiat currency and cryptocurrency will be manipulated, and people will print more of it, and they will tweak the issuance to favor a select few. And Bitcoin will be different, and that's going to be very important. The other distinction, of course, is open versus closed. And this is key. I mean, the current legacy system is gate-kept. You have to prove yourself to get access to it. You may have to have a certain amount of capital to do certain things. You may have to have a certain passport. You may have to have, prove that you don't disagree with the government in some way. Bitcoin doesn't care about any of that. It's an equal opportunity money. It provides quality of monetary equality. I think that's very, very important. And then the third area is that Bitcoin is a currency of freedom and not control. So the permissionless nature of it is very, very effective in terms of making it a good human rights tool. Again, all other digital currencies are currencies of control. I think another way of looking at it is that all other digital currencies are liabilities, right? They're somebody else's liability. Somebody issues them. In classical economics, there's this idea of outside money versus inside money, right? So traditionally speaking, inside money would be any kind of legacy instrument, whether US Treasury or the dollars, anything issued by somebody, right? Where outside money was pretty much gold. Like you can't, take somebody's gold away, right? It's like they have it, right? And you can't demonetize it, you can't inflate it, et cetera, et cetera. In the digital world, there's only one outside money, and that's Bitcoin. Everything else is a liability. So when it comes to a human rights activist or a dissident or a journalist doing work, it's supremely important that they have a monetary tool that can't be remotely confiscated, that can't be inflated away, that can't be kind of canceled or demonetized, that can't be sort of easily spied on. And obviously Bitcoin's permissionless nature, the fact that you can use it without proving your ID makes that a little bit easier for sure. And then, that it can't be censored. So for all these reasons, you've started to see activists and NGOs start to flock to Bitcoin as kind of a plan B. And I expect that to just continue to increase in the coming decade.
Yeah, so what I learned in the last months I've been in Zimbabwe and Zambia is that Bitcoiners, even Bitcoiners, a lot of them don't know that the Lightning Network exists. I think that's a huge opportunity to educate or share knowledge about the Lightning Network here. Miles, I know you're working with Cash App to facilitate the Lightning Network. Please tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I am so excited about the potential of the Lightning Network to tear down walled gardens across the world and connect people across the globe in a free and instant method built on an open standard that's open to everyone. And we're already seeing the initial first implications of this. For example, if I'm in the US and I'm on Cash App, I can talk to Bernard in Nigeria, and he can send me a QR code using his app BitNob, which is an amazing local African app. So big shout out to Bernard. But all of a sudden, we're speaking the same monetary language. And this monetary language can be spoken all around the world. And we're seeing a generation of new Bitcoin wallets stood up in local jurisdictions with proper entities and proper fiat connections. But all I have to do is scan his QR code, and for instantly and for free from Cash App, we will transfer that Bitcoin over the network and into his BitNob account, and in some cases, it can even instantly cash it out to his local bank account. And we're seeing this with BIPA in Brazil, with Bello in Argentina. There's a crop of these apps cropping up all around the world, and it's going to have huge implications where all of a sudden we're no longer held down by borders or different ecosystems, where all of these apps can communicate and go in and out of Bitcoin and into the local fiats in 1 second with very limited fees. And that's a total game changer in terms of just like monetary interoperability around the world. And I think it's still early, but I'm very, very excited about what this could mean. Additionally, in the continent of Africa, I'm seeing some incredible entrepreneurs innovating on the Lightning Network in ways that are native to many of the users of the country. That's a core tenet of how we do things at Cash App, is we want to make features as accessible as possible. We want to meet users where they are, and I want to give a shout out to my friend KG, who's working in South Africa. And and what he's done is he has built a Bitcoin wallet into the USSD system that so many people on this continent use as their primary, within like a feature phone, as their primary way to access mobile money, to pay bills, to do all sorts of things. And by integrating Lightning Network into this system, it's bringing it to tens, hundreds of millions of people in a way that's very familiar to them. Obviously, there's a long way to go still. Obviously, it's not going to be an easy, across the continent, there's different telecoms and banks and all. Not everybody's, it's a kind of in disarray and often at odds with each other. But I think if we can continue to integrate Bitcoin into these local rails, if we can get a Bitcoin telecom, I think that is a huge step forward, where then all of a sudden we can essentially have we could have fiat on and off rails across the continent using mobile money, meeting customers where in a way that they're most used to, using the Lightning Network for global interoperability. And I think that'd be a huge, huge step forward for the continent. So this is a rabbit hole I've been diving into recently, and I'm really excited to continue to explore it.
So Magatte, maybe I think it could be interesting for the audience to hear what the practical use cases are. How have you been able to use Bitcoin and the Lightning Network to make business easier for you?
I wish I was able to speak to that at this point, just simply because it's not something that I've been able to get my employees to, take into. And this is why what he just talked about is so hopeful as far as I'm concerned. This is totally what needs to happen. Oftentimes I hear people in the community talk about the need for education. We have to educate people more. We have to educate people more. And I understand that thing, but don't put all your eggs on educating people more. At the end of the day, most people that use credit cards around the world, do you think they know how credit cards work? Do you think they know or care about how the sausage is made? Absolutely not. All people need to know is, how much am I getting? Can I move my money around? Can I switch it to a different currency if we still have other currencies? That's all they care about. So my whole bet is on this Lightning Network. Make it work, make it seamless, make it easy, and people will come. So my people, my employees are not willing to go on at this point simply because it's just too many frictions still yet. So we've got a long way to go, but I also know that people are working towards that. So I'm betting on the Lightning Network or things similar to that because I'm sure, better might come. But that's my only bet. This whole education thing, we got to educate more people. But I want to thank Anita, though, because Anita has been on this road for so many years, and it's thanks to what you have been doing that today someone like me can say, and we also need to do the Lightning Network. So thanks, Anita. I'm not discouraging what you've done.
Thank you very much. Awesome. I'm honored. Thanks. I just wanted to say, when I was in Zimbabwe in October, so I did a lightning payment from the Eastern Highlands, which is a very remote area. And I was there and I thought, okay, now I'm trying this out. Does it really work? And I sent a lightning payment to Bitcoin Ekasi, so basically to South Africa from my own node, my voltage node. I used the Suter app. And sent basically from my own node to Bitcoin Ekasi. It worked like in seconds. And if you compare that to the traditional payment rails here, like using Machankura or all the others, Western Union, etc., they not only have a minimum limit of money that you can send. I mean, I can send 2 Satoshis to Bitcoin Ekasi. They also have a maximum limit, yeah? So that's basically financial oppression. You can't just freely send money in and out. And I mean, living in Zimbabwe shows me how difficult it is for people on this continent to live, work, and concentrate on their life, basically. Because you have so many hassles with money. I mean, the most repeated question, I think, in Zimbabwe is, what's the rate today? Yeah, and your whole life is circulating around that, but I guess you in the audience know much more about that than we do, or I do. But I would like to come back also to the question of, there's always this topic of, or I hear many people say, but Bitcoin, is it legal? Or something like that. And I say, no, it's not forbidden, you can use it, yes? And I think they also conflate it with being legal tender. Yeah. I would also like to talk about that a little bit now. So you can use Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be legal tender. That's the whole point. It's a voluntary system as an alternative to traditional currencies. So Miles, may I start with you? Because you told me you've been in El Salvador 6 months before it was declared legal tender. So I would like to discuss with you on the panel now the differences between grassroots development, bottom-up Bitcoin adoption, and top-down Bitcoin adoption.
Certainly. And in any case, I am in the camp of bottoms-up adoption, of bringing everyday utility to Bitcoin. And like Magatte said, sometimes you don't even have to know what Bitcoin is in order for it to be solving problems for you. I'm struck by a story from a good friend that Alex introduced me to, Roya, who's an entrepreneur from Afghanistan, whom I recently had the opportunity to interview her at Block. But in 2013...
And she's here, by the way.
She's here, by the way, and she's amazing. Say hello. But in 2013, she had set up a program for women in Afghanistan to do tasks online and earn money. And traditionally, there's not a lot of monetary freedom for women in Afghanistan. This was during Taliban rule, and she was able to get them paid in Bitcoin so that they can use it within their local community, so that they can keep it secret, so that they're not at the whims of their husbands or their family. And it's another very early use case of Bitcoin being used as money, but that didn't come from a top-down dictate. That came because it brought immediate utility for the use case that they were seeing. And so I saw the same thing in El Salvador as well, in El Zonte, before it became this whole phenomenon on Bitcoin Twitter and in the news and whatnot. But when I got down there, it was really just a local community of people engaged in education, engaged in work to make their community better, and as a result, they were paying people in Bitcoin. And then as a result, people wanted to spend this Bitcoin, and it's taken off and done a lot of good for that community, which ultimately led to the government taking interest and passing this law, which has been a mixed bag, in my opinion, to some extent. I think the most controversial part was the enforced mandate of Bitcoin acceptance, which as a voluntary currency is obviously somewhat problematic, or at least controversial. But I also believe that the way it's been portrayed in the press is overly negative. I think that, did you really think the New York Times was gonna praise a country going rogue and hopping on the Bitcoin standard? So I think it's a mixed bag. I think we can do a lot better there. I've recently been having some Twitter conversations with the folks working on the app there, because there's such low-hanging fruit for better interoperability. We need the Chivo wallet to lead with Lightning. Don't lead with your proprietary QR code. Or if you want to lead with that, there's technology out there where we can layer that Chivo QR code on top of a Lightning QR code, so we don't break paying if you're not paying from a Chivo QR code. So there's another project happening. I think you mentioned it, Bitcoin Akasi in South Africa as well. This is their shirt. I'm hoping to help. I'm hoping to support more of these local communities, because I've seen the good that they can do and the passion that it evokes across the local community, but beyond as well, and makes them feel connected to this global community and global monetary network. So I'm all about the bottoms-up approach, and it's so inspiring to see it taking off in more and more places.
Yeah, thank you. Magatte, do you have any knowledge of, is Bitcoin legal tender now in the Central African Republic? Has anyone heard something about that from you?
I think Alex might speak better on that. I have been trying to find out what the heck is going on in the Central African Republic about this whole, Bitcoin becoming the legal tender now. At first, I thought the law was passed, but now it doesn't look like it's really passed. Alex, I think you've been spending more time with some of the people involved in it. I don't know. Do you know something more? Because I am trying to find out.
Sadly, it just seems that while the president of the Central African Republic might be, honest and interested and intrigued by Bitcoin, there's a small circle of people around him who manipulated his interest, and they launched like an ICO coin, and that's just very, very sad. So I'm not sure, what kind of lessons we can learn from that, other than that politicians are always going to try and manipulate the situation and manipulate, the allure around Bitcoin to do their own thing. And that's why we just need to, continue to teach people how to self-custody Bitcoin. But in general, I think that the spectrum of law in Bitcoin is so vast. Of course, it's better for a government to adopt and support Bitcoin. I think that, forcing legal tender, obviously some people have problems with that. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think that the best thing a government can do is probably just get rid of capital gains tax so we can use Bitcoin as money. That's just an easy slam dunk if they want to support Bitcoin. But I would draw your attention to the fact that in Nigeria, where Bitcoin, where there's regulations against going from your bank account to a cryptocurrency exchange, there are way more Bitcoin users than in El Salvador, where it's forced, right? So I think bottom-up adoption is really, where Bitcoin shines. And just the obvious fact that, there's so many people in dictatorships that use Bitcoin, and there's tens of millions of people using Bitcoin in places like China, where the slightest transgression can land you in prison. So that's what gives me hope that this thing is a wave that's going to be very, very hard to stop. But certainly, we'll be welcoming other governments that want to get involved. I think we certainly will be.
But Anita, I can add one more thing maybe to people in this room's radar, and I'll talk about it some more in my fireside chat tomorrow. But I don't know how many people here are aware or are following the Startup Cities movement. Some people call it the Charter Cities movement. Don't know, I don't see hands being raised here. But anyway, the whole Startup Cities movement is those of us who believe that most of the poor nations in the world are simply they're regulated for poverty. The reason why Africa is the poorest region in the world, economically speaking, is because we happen to be also the most over-regulated region in the world, and it also shows in our banking and finance laws and regulations. That's a big problem. But beyond that, we're thinking, I told you I'm involved in this whole thing of reforms, business reforms, to make it easier to do business. So piecemeal legislation is something that we have to do, just like, right now we're having to do Bitcoin education, but we also know that, ideally we go for the Lightning Network situation. So in this situation, what we're doing is saying, okay, piecemeal legislation takes too long, it's kind of tedious work. What can help, leapfrog this whole effort? And so some of us are thinking in a country, on a given piece of land, can we basically subject that piece of land to its own law and governance, right? And so that's what the startup cities are. And so there's one of them right now in Honduras, on the island of Roatan, where they have made Bitcoin the legal tender. And that one, in my mind, is quite promising. And we are working on another startup cities in an undisclosed West African nation, where I am very hopeful that we will get Bitcoin to also become legal tender there. So very nascent, field, but I would encourage all of you guys to look into these new type of zones that we call startup city zones, common law zones, places of that nature.
Thank you. So now we're doing the last round. Miles, I would like to ask you your opinion about what do you think are the keys to success? So what should we do that Bitcoin is becoming more and more used as a money on the continent or everywhere?
Excuse me, sorry, can you rephrase that?
It's hard to hear.
What are ideas that you have? How can we educate people better on the African continent to make Bitcoin more used as money?
I see. I think it's all about utility, and that's what we've been really focused on at Cash App with the Lightning Network, providing free and instant payments that supersede borders and empower individuals across the world. I think that education is a big part of it. I think that use cases are even more important, and so the simple use case, like Magatte mentioned, just like paying across a border to your neighbor. If you have two Lightning-enabled apps that have fiat banking connections or mobile money connections on either side, you don't even have to be invested in Bitcoin as the asset. We can separate the network from the asset and just transfer the value as Bitcoin for free and instantly across that border, immediately cash it out into the local fiat in and out of these two separate, disparate banking systems. To me, that's a revolutionary act. And I think the more connections we have or on and off ramps that are speaking the language of Lightning and taking down these artificial barriers, I think adoption and usage will thrive as a result.
And just to everything, Miles said, and on top of that, I would say, think also contextually and think locally. And I would say, if you want faster, better adoption, go and think and look at what how do you call that? In the US, we have a Miles thing with a card and all that. So think about some type of, I'm not sure what the right word is, but if you attach something like that to the wallets, you're getting some extra something. If you're using, I give you an example. If you're gonna use your Bitcoin now at the market, so incentivize the merchant to obviously take Bitcoin by maybe telling them, if you take Bitcoin, for every 1 kilogram of rice the lady is going to come and buy, you will give her 1.2 kilograms of rice. We're paying for it. The lady comes and she's like, if she comes and she buys 1 kilogram of rice, she knows she's going to leave with 1.2 kilogram of rice because she used Bitcoin. And who pays for that extra 0.2 kilogram of rice? You. All you wanted is for them to get on. So think about what is it that you're giving them. So, and also, you know what I mean? So I'm wondering if stuff like that might not be also, helpful in terms of faster adoption to get people on the bandwagon.
Thanks. Alex?
Yeah, I just want to, look, we're concluding this panel. Bitcoin is money. For me, when I look at it, Bitcoin's an emergent money. It is something that's monetizing from zero, from nothing, from just an idea, to something that I think is going to one day be the reserve currency for the entire planet. We're very early on that journey, and therefore I think this event we're at is very far-sighted and historic. I think we're going to look back at this moment here in this room with all of us here as something very special. But the establishment really doesn't like us gathering here. The establishment really doesn't like this, and I think part of that is because the economic establishment, the academic establishment, the policy establishment views money as something that can only be debt. It can only be a debt or credit system. This is something they really believe. They actually don't agree with Magatte at even how money was obviously self-evidently created. They don't even believe in this double coincidence of wants thing. They always believe money was debt. And there's certainly truth to that in some areas, but the reality is that they want us to live in a system where all money is debt and credit. And we're saying, no, we're not going to live in that system. And we're saying, hey, with the Bitcoin Lightning Network, we can make instant payments that are assets, where there's no credit or debt in the system. The consequences of that for humanity are so profound, we haven't even started thinking about that yet. We can have peer-to-peer global economies that are not debt and credit systems. That's just very, very deep, and I think we should reflect on that. And it's something that is going to really piss off the people who are currently in charge, because they want everything to be credit and debt, and that's not the foundation of an economic system. That is something that can help expand an economic system, and of course there's going to be credit and debt in the Bitcoin standard, but it shouldn't be the foundation. It shouldn't be what we stand on. It should be something sound. So I'm so excited to be with you all here today and watch you build this incredible future. So thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you.